This is what I hope to be a fantastic video on vulnerable narcissism. This was a very difficult video for me to make, and not because of the time it took or the complexity of the subject matter, but because only about 1 out of every 10 takes am I capable of pronouncing the word narcissism. Made worse with the addition of the word vulnerable. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. She sells seashells by the seashore, yet for some reason I've had to take countless blows to my pride attempting to enunciate vulnerable narcissism. But what I may lack in pronunciation, I make up for in obstinance. So, let us begin. I am not a mental health professional and I have no formal education on the topic. But like so many people who learn a little about a specific area of psychology, I arrived here out of necessity, desperation, and many years of frustration. So often, those with a personality disorder, especially the narcissistic variety, are resistant to the idea that they could have a problem and may never have the chance to be diagnosed by a professional, resulting in many self-educated and perhaps poorly educated sorts like myself simply trying to make sense of things. Friends and family end up in disagreements based on their varying levels of tolerance for the narcissist's behavior. People tend to line up very differently. Not only in how they approach issues, but also in being able to understand the issue and what they know. So in this video, I'd like to do what I can to help people understand vulnerable narcissism without having to commit to hundreds of hours of research as I did. First, let's get a bit of a basic description. I think most people are somewhat familiar with narcissism. You see exaggerated feelings of self-importance, a need for admiration, less empathy, but we're going to go a little deeper into the subtypes. Narcissists can be described as being more overt or more covert. While overt narcissism is quite observable, easy to detect, covert narcissism is a bit less obvious, being more noticeable maybe with time and experience. The coverts know it's better to blend in, and blend in they do. You might say that a covert and overt description somewhat describes what can be externally perceived, how the narcissist is acting. In the same way, narcissists can be more grandiose or more vulnerable. The grandiose narcissist is often very impressive, very confident, perhaps arrogant or entitled, and maybe they deserve to be. Some of the most impressive and high-performing people on the planet might be narcissistic. They think they're amazing and they'd like you to give them the recognition that they may or may not deserve. The vulnerable narcissist has far less confidence and stews in negative emotions like depression, anxiety, insecurity, and bitterness. They are victims. They want your help, your pity, your attention. They feel entitled to it and can become quite defensive or frustrated when they detect any interference. The same narcissist can be both grandiose or vulnerable, sometimes depending on the situation or perhaps on age and experience. Many grandiose narcissists have bouts of vulnerability or become more vulnerable as life goes on and continues to disprove their sense of grandiosity. Though the terms vulnerable and grandiose are sometimes used interchangeably with the terms covert and overt, they are not quite the same. And to use vulnerable and grandiose cuts a bit closer to the core of how a narcissist aligns, what's really going on inside. The subtype I'll be discussing is that of the vulnerable covert, which I'll just be referring to as vulnerable, since it could be argued that covertness is somewhat inferred. The vulnerable narcissist's strategy of advertising their neediness and fragility somewhat requires that they be able to blend in to a certain extent, and being too overtly unempathetic and self-interested would risk blowing their cover and exposing them to critique, to shame, to narcissistic injury. In any case, vulnerable narcissism is a quite insidious form that can do a lot of damage to any social circle, leaving others confused, defeated, and at odds with each other. So let's hear from a few big brain professionals as they paint a more detailed picture of how this type of narcissism works, and I'm going to pull from a few sources, so there's going to be a bit of overlap in the descriptions. Some will say vulnerable, some might say covert, but in large part they are referring to the same individual.
These are the victimized, vulnerable, anxious, socially less skilled, sullen, and resentful narcissists. They'll say things like, oh, must be nice to have a family that just always bails you out. Must be nice to get overpaid for your job. Must be nice that you have such a big house. You get the idea, on and on and on. And it's also quite manipulative. Now, there is a tremendous hypersensitivity observed in covert narcissism. They are very vulnerable in the face of any kind of feedback, constructive criticism, anything like that.
And their sort of powder keg pressure cooker quality comes from a combination of their perpetual brooding and angry ruminating, as well as their quick, angry reactions towards anything that feels like a slight.
A covert narcissist is a collapsed narcissist. It's a narcissist who keeps failing to obtain a regular flow of high-quality narcissistic supply. but it is still a narcissist.
A fragile or vulnerable narcissist fails to convince other people. They can't bully or cajole or seduce other people into agreeing, into matching the treatment of them with their hyper-idealized self-image. So their narcissistic supply is low, it's patchy, it's not high quality, so they're kind of like a junkie struggling to get good junk. And so they become fragile and they become hypersensitive to criticism because there's already an internal voice. It's called a superego injunction or an inner critic that's already badgering them, that's already telling them you're useless, you're no good. And they feel a lot of shame because their entitlement is up here, the treatment they get from the world is down here. That disparity creates the stress, the somatic stress in the body that we call cognitive dissonance. They then become extremely hypersensitive to new sources of narcissistic injury that are reminding them, kid, you ain't that special.
But if the failure is persistent, repeated, and there's no way out, no strategy works, then this kind of narcissist will remain immured and immersed in a permanent state of resentment and bitterness and seething envy.
They often present as somewhat depressed, victimized, or even needy. They also display other negative mood states such as irritability, hostility, anxiety, and even sadness. However, they are narcissistic, so they have the same themes as their classical and grandiose buddies. They are still grandiose, they are still arrogant, entitled, validation seeking, but it looks and it feels different when you're in their presence.
These individuals have determined long ago, and they continue on all the way into their adult years, thinking openness and honesty about who I really am doesn't work. I'm going to go ahead and buy off on all of these non-truths, and that's going to then become my persona. Now, we have a term for that, and the term is the false self. Narcissists are very invested in trying to present themselves as beyond the average or normal kind of person. They don't want you to know what's going on inside of them. They can't say, I can't go on blaming everyone else for the rest of time. At some point, I've got to take responsibility for how I contribute to some of the difficulties that I'm involved in. They won't say that. It would be nice to hear them say, I could certainly use some guidance. Therapy would certainly work out well for me. I think I could take advantage of that. They won't say that. Or if they do go to therapy, it's because they're trying to impress the therapist so they can then have ammunition against other individuals.
So they cycle between elation and depletion. So therefore, they're more moody, generally speaking, than the grandiose narcissist, but also you'll see them cry. You'll see them fragile. You'll see them vulnerable. They will say sorry. They will apologize, but ultimately they're only cycling as they're trying to get back up to a position of power, because everything that this personality disorder is all about power over others. They think that they're amazing. They think that they're wonderful. They think that they're special, but largely speaking, they're struggling to convince the world that that's true. So when they get feedback from real people, and they're not just getting feedback from inside their head, it's creating multiple small narcissistic injuries, because largely people are going, actually, you're not particularly interesting. No, you're not very special. And they get negative feedback from the environment. In narcissistic personality disorder, remember, everything is all about this thing that we call the false self. They have a delusional view of themselves as all powerful, super sexy, super exciting, super interesting, the richest, the bravest, the most intelligent, the most qualified, whatever. That's the false self, right? Reality and truth are the enemy of the narcissist. They have to keep the reality and truth at bay in order to support the false self.
The world will never feel right or fair to them. The vulnerable narcissistic person will forever feel like a victim, that the world owes them something, that life has been uniquely unfair to them. It is very seductive if someone loves being a helper or a fixer or a rescuer.
Any covert narcissist in any family system is simply exhausting. The relationship is a constant back and forth between guilt, exhaustion, and fear of their anger.
So that was a good intro, a bit of a basic description, but in this video we're going to try to expound as best we can on each individual attribute with a checklist I put together to try and help. But before I go there, I should explain why I wanted to do this. The internet is rife with videos and articles about vulnerable NPD, but so often there really isn't much uniformity when it comes to categorizing the indicators of this type of narcissist. Dozens of professionals have YouTube channels with videos about 5 or 10 things to look out for, 10 indicators of vulnerable narcissism. But to really get a solid picture of the disorder, you'd have to watch many videos and there would be lots of overlap. For any newcomer trying to understand it, it would be easy to stop their research too soon, having oversimplified the disorder in their minds. On the other hand, you have people like Professor Vaknin, who is by far the greatest source of information on narcissism. But his videos, though thorough, are often quite long, are delivered at a high level, they're for current or future professionals, and there are quite literally hundreds of them. What I've sought to do is to distill what's out there, pulling mostly from Vaknin, into a simplified checklist that really describes the core traits and to go through those traits one by one. But I also understand it becomes a very daunting task to dig down and seek the origin of thoughts and actions, because these things don't really operate like a chain reaction. It's not as simple as fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, as Master Yoda put it. Just like neural structures, the mind operates more as a web, where thoughts and instincts are connected and one can only really theorize the base origin of a specific thought or behavior. Is brain chemistry downstream from the psychological, which is downstream from childhood trauma, the external? Or are genetics and brain chemistry, perhaps an inflamed prefrontal cortex, causing the psychological?
The studies absolutely show brain differences, but they cannot determine whether the PD, the personality disorder, is caused by these brain differences, or if having the PD, the personality disorder, causes the brain differences. The brain is malleable. This is called neuroplasticity. And like a muscle, what is practiced frequently grows in strength, and what is neglected or injured atrophies and gets smaller and less effective. So if you're not practicing empathy, seeing things from other people's points of view, being humble, being kind. If you're not practicing it, you might actually just experience atrophy.
Is childhood trauma ever fully to blame? Or should we consider a spirit, a soul? Can we really trade the cumulative wisdom of all of mankind throughout time for the somewhat nihilistic idea that we are only physical beings? Fact is that people who believed in a soul built earthquake-proof megalithic structures with technology and precision that we cannot as of yet replicate despite having lasers and diamond-tip drills. And the idea that any people that preceded our scientific revolution were a bunch of dumb cavemen is simply not supported by the evidence. If we go in that direction, then some might describe this sort of hyper-corrupted nature simply as being given over to the biblical sense of pride, envy, and wrath, disseminated through an individual's unique mind and complex psychology, which science ever seeks to define and explain in terms that it can accept and perhaps treat. My mind wants this to be simpler than it is. I wanted a well-defined checklist of concepts. But since this topic is very complex and causality at times seems to be self-referential, it forced me to accept the idea that creating a truly accurate list of core traits would constitute nothing short of sheer hubris. But I've accepted this and have done my best regardless. So, with the objective of helping common folk like me understand vulnerable narcissism without having to do endless research, I've selected 7 core traits which we will cover here, starting with victimhood. To briefly summarize, for vulnerable narcissists, their claimed trauma is often one of the least private things about them. They are deeply insecure, deeply envious, and at war with themselves and their place in the world. So if they don't feel like a winner, someone else must be assigned responsibility. Proposing hard work, discipline, or growth as the solution to any of their circumstances or complaints will likely result in that person being attacked. And be very cautious if you dare question the details or underlying assumptions within their story of victimhood, because you will absolutely be perceived as a threat. You are an enemy not only to their reputation, but also to their own self-esteem. If you begin to sound anything like the self-loathing voice in their head that they've been running from their whole life, you will be slammed with contempt, or perhaps a digression into even further victimhood and emotional manipulation. You are a new oppressor. Their view of the world and of others has been toxified because they themselves lack empathy.
The victim status that a narcissist carries is all a part of the grand denial that they operate with.
The core of vulnerable narcissism, which is a chronic sense of victimhood. They believe that nothing goes their way. Everyone is against them. The deck is stacked against them. They suffer more than anyone. They resent, they're sullen, and they feel life is only unfair to them. That means that the success of anyone else is the ultimate goad, and it usually is viewed through a cynical lens like, ugh, the only reason you're successful is you're lucky, or you slept your way to the top, or you didn't really work hard, whatever it is. And they will often believe that there's no point to working hard because nobody will ever recognize how good they are. And if things don't go the way they want, which they usually don't, they will not see it as they're not doing the work or they're not meeting their requirements, but rather that the world is out to get them. When you mix that all together with entitlement, you get the sense of, I am owed what they have. I deserve what they have. I should have what they have. This is the type of narcissism that is more sullen, resentful, broodingly angry, aggrieved, passive-aggressive. In fact, many people don't even clock it as narcissism.
It's profoundly important for these individuals to appear or to think of themselves as ideal. They want to say, hey, look at me. I'm smarter than everyone else, or I'm prettier than everyone else, or more handsome than everyone else. I'm better than other people. I'm more accomplished than other folks. I'm more popular. I'm more connected. I'm more admired than other people. They have to seem to be a very ideal person because it's their way of compensating for the hidden fears that truly drive them. Likewise, we can say that they have a fundamental pessimism regarding the nature of love and connection and goodness. It's like, well, if I really start talking about my flaws or imperfections or our differences, it's not going to go well at all. You're no longer going to admire me. And they don't realize that actually love can be enhanced as we know each other's flaws or differences or imperfections, because then as we continue to show acceptance to each other, there's a depth that begins to be generated. They can't think that way at all. As part of their script of claiming victimization and all the benefits that go along with that, they have to have a villain in the script, and that's where you come in. It's like, well, I'm a decent person, but people out there, you, are making my life miserable. And so they tend to go heavily into the blame and accusation mode. When you see that and that chronic criticism, you know that they're setting you up for them to feel victimized and you're the villain. But it's important for you to know that all of this stuff is going to happen on the inside of themselves, whether you're on the stage with them or not. They want to make all of their victimization about you. But in fact, if somebody else were in the same role, they would eventually be in the same position toward that person too.
Now, when we look at covert narcissism in a family setting, you may be so accustomed in your family to trying to fix things. And everyone in that family has always been so accustomed to enabling the covert narcissist that it can be very difficult to shift this pattern in any meaningful way.
Next is grandiosity, and I'm just going to read off my little description here. It's characterized by an exaggerated belief in their own capabilities, achievements, and importance, which is central to their false self. They may feel entitled, expect special treatment, devalue others, and become highly defensive if challenged. Their grandiosity masks their insecurity, leading to regular reassurance seeking, while outwardly denying any need for reassurance. Embedded in their grandiosity is usually a sense of moral authority and superiority.
The narcissist has a group of voices, a coalition of voices inside himself that keep informing him how weak he is, how stupid he is, how ugly, how inadequate, what a loser, how unlovable.
Then in an attempt to avoid these intolerable, unbearable effects, the narcissist becomes something or someone else, the false self.
Someone with properties and traits and qualities and characteristics which are the exact opposite of who the narcissist truly is.
The core of this nuclear reactor is shame. Narcissists adopt all kinds of defenses to counter narcissistic shame. They develop addictive, reckless, or impulsive behaviors. Some of them become antisocial, a bit psychopathic. They deny, withdraw, rage, or engage in a compulsive pursuit of some kind of unattainable, of course, perfection. Narcissists display haughtiness and exhibitionism. All these are attempts to deny, repress, or reframe the shame. All these defenses are primitive. They're infantile. The shame never goes away. It is just transmuted and transubstantiated through the mechanisms of the false self and the grandiosity gap. The gaps generate shame. The false self fends off the shame by becoming even more grandiose. And this grandiosity generates additional gaps, which generate shame, which drive the grandiosity. And it is an escalating spiral. So the locus of grandiosity is a narrative, it's a story, it's a piece of fiction, it's a script, it's a movie, which renders the narcissist in some way unique. Grandiosity is about being special, one of a kind, sui generis, not about being superior. For example, the narcissist could feel grandiose as a victim. The narcissist could feel grandiose as someone who has failed spectacularly. Grandiosity is about the spectacle, not about feeling superior. Narcissists can feel grandiose for being uniquely inferior, uniquely victimized, unique failures, uniquely defeated, and so on.
Both victimhood and grandiosity are two sides of the same coin. And indeed, the narcissist succeeds to combine them in a way that is highly specific to pathological narcissism. He says, I am a victim because I'm godlike. I'm hyper intelligent. I'm super accomplished. I am unprecedented. I am incomparable. And because of this, people envy me. Because of this, they want to take me down. The narcissist knows deep inside that he is being abusive, that he is abrasive, that he is sadistic, that he is cruel. In short, that he is truly a bad person. And so to compensate for this, he pretends to be a victim. It's a form of reaction formation. I'm not the abuser, I'm a victim. That's victimhood. I'm not weak, I'm super strong. That's grandiosity.
Next is self-centeredness. This selfishness is at the core of just about every topic we'll cover, so I won't go too deep on it. I'll just point out a few characteristics and move on. These folks are likely to prioritize their own problems or complaints about life, their victimhood, over that of others. So you might see some one-upmanship. They want the spotlight. Some will say these folks have no empathy, but a better way to say it might be that they have selective empathy or can use it as a tool and are more willing to do so strategically when it helps them. They will overvalue their contribution or abilities, and at the same time, because they are vulnerable and insecure, they might prefer to avoid any real responsibility to avoid scrutiny or embarrassment. Since they come first, their reputation comes first. When they see others, they see themselves in comparison, and their insecurity may very well come to light because of that comparison.
All of us refer to the environment and then refer to ourselves. It is a kind of referential model, kind of recursive model. We go out into the environment, we retrieve data through our senses, and then we process these data. This interaction is at the core of what we call consciousness. The narcissist doesn't do that. The narcissist's entire repertoire of interactions, relationships, actions, choices, decisions, cognitions, emotions, the entire thing is encapsulated within a fantastic space. The narcissist's only object is himself or herself.
You'll tell them a story about your friend who's getting a divorce. Oh, they're just interested. About your friend whose father just died of COVID. Oh, they're not interested. You tell them about the fact that you had a car accident and, you broke your foot. They're not all that interested. So you'll notice that there's this general disinterest in what's going on with you, especially, or other people, especially when it's emotional.
They always see themselves in competition with you. So they've either got to shoot you down by sabotaging you, criticizing you, undermining you, or they've got to fluff themselves up so they perceive themselves as being lifted up to your level. But they're always leveling themselves with you. They never give any compliments because that would be at their expense. If they gave you a serious compliment, a sincere compliment, if they said, hey, you really did a fine job today, that speech you gave was really genuine, it was authentic, and it inspired the whole group. They could never give you that compliment because they would see that as at their expense.
Next up, we have fragility, being very quick to react to any perceived slight, to any narcissistic injury. Given that the false self is in fact false, it's propaganda intended for themselves, something of an obstinate counter-narrative to combat ever-present self-critical thoughts in their heads, they are especially vulnerable to any criticisms that seem to agree with those voices and threaten to bring down their whole protective psychological house of cards. You've heard the phrase, not to burst your bubble, in reference to dispelling someone of an apparent delusion. Well, their carefully constructed bubble contains the very oxygen that they need to breathe, and anyone holding a needle deserves to be made to understand the severity of their actions should they cause this bubble to be compromised. Some of us can relate to how they're feeling. I get this feeling when another vehicle on the road acts recklessly and my sudden fear or defensiveness immediately turns into a thought of anger or aggression, since these folks don't seem to understand that they just put me in harm's way and that deserves a response. Personally, I hold the horn down for a minimum of 2 seconds.
The fragile sense of self, sometimes called the fragile ego, is that part of the narcissist that recognizes that they are not special. It's insecurity, a sense of vulnerability. It's too painful to directly confront. So the false self, or the false persona, must stay in place to protect the ego from this horrible pain. So when the narcissist is criticized, that challenges the narcissism, that protective part. The narcissist compensates for the criticism through rage. Rage allows the narcissist to keep that false self in place, to maintain their own self-deception. The only person a narcissist really needs to deceive is themselves. They try to deceive others, but again, they only need to lie to themselves. And of course, they need to believe those lies. In the moment when a narcissist is criticized, or whatever triggers the reaction, we see that the anger is sudden, irrational, disproportionate to the level of criticism, and may involve physical gestures or even aggression. So that's the reactive component. But then after this, we see recurrent anger outbursts and a desire to get revenge that can really last a long time. This is the instrumental part.
The outburst will reveal envy. The outburst will reveal entitlement. The outburst will reveal these other narcissistic traits. And what you will notice in hindsight is that this person got angry when others did not cater to them, when others did not praise them, when others possibly wanted to offer them constructive criticism.
Anger and hatred are just below the surface all the time, right? It's kind of like handling an unstable explosive. When this rage occurs, the narcissist tries to gain allies, to get people to agree with them that the critic was really the problem. So just by getting agreement like this, just this alone, can help the narcissist put the protective barrier back over that fragile sense of self. And at some point, because these people that the narcissist approaches are afraid of the narcissist, they could use this as an opportunity to build a relationship with the narcissist, and may even become what we sometimes refer to as flying monkeys. That's a reference from The Wizard of Oz. So that means they will essentially become agents of the narcissist. So it's interesting because the narcissist more or less recruits these agents, sometimes anyway, because of the narcissistic rage.
Let's also remember that though this fragility might be instinctive, unavoidable, the effects of this fragility are not lost on them. How they lash out can still have a manipulative intent behind it. They will act like a wounded child. Their outbursts are childish, but the victim is about to be you, even if all they can do to fight you is to fight you psychologically. I've seen tears eerily turn into rage and then back to even more pitiful tears, all in the span of a few seconds, and in a way that just isn't possible for someone with authentic emotions. And that brings us to our next topic, contempt and domination. And I'm going to take a bit more time on this one because there's just so much to it, and it's so central to anyone's lived experience with a narcissist. I decided to combine these two concepts because it seems to me that the narcissist combines them. They go hand in hand. When triggered by narcissistic injury, when confronted with a situation that makes them uncomfortable, like critique or blame, so often they will engineer their responses to achieve nothing short of psychological dominance over whoever is threatening their false self and has therefore earned their contempt. In their contempt, and regardless of whether what they've done is in any way defensible, they will make it absolutely impossible for you to feel like you've gotten through to them, to feel like you've won. They'll have you questioning yourself, reality, or simply your own sanity. There's a domination aspect to their tactics. You got passive aggression, gaslighting, blame shifting, playing dumb, anything that makes a productive conversation impossible and frustrates you. There's also a manipulation aspect, but behind all that is contempt, is how dare you? I'll show you. In an otherwise rational and mature conversation, they'd rather quit or simply embarrass themselves and go down in a blaze of glory than to admit defeat. Their tactics ensure that even if you win, you'll feel like you've lost. If they're going down, you are too. No disagreement with them will be clean and logical. You could say they are expert mud wrestlers. They don't feel the need to act in good faith because in their eyes, you are not acting in good faith. So any response is warranted to defend themselves, for they are the innocent, victimized hero of the story. They are perfectly willing to sacrifice reason, relationship, respect at the altar of their own grandiosity for the master they serve, themselves. So let's start with what and why, and then we'll move on to how. So why contempt? How do we get to contempt? Well, it all starts with shame. Rejected and projected shame.
When you're exposed to pain and hurt and abuse and trauma, you develop shame because you're helpless. To feel helpless is intolerable. It's unbearable. When you're helpless, you're dehumanized. You're objectified. You lose agency. So pain and hurt and trauma and abuse, especially protracted ones, they create a strong sense of helplessness. We call it learned helplessness. Shame means that you're somehow responsible for something that has happened. Shame goes hand in hand with personal responsibility. So the transition from pain and hurt and trauma and abuse, the transition from helplessness to shame is an attempt to reassert control and mastery over the situation and thus restore predictability and hope, and at the same time take responsibility for whatever has happened. But narcissism, pathological narcissism, is a rejection of shame. Nothing terrifies a narcissist more than humiliation and shame. So by avoiding shame, the narcissist remains stuck in the helplessness phase. How to overcome this sense of helplessness, all pervasive, consuming, subsuming sense of helplessness? By demonizing other people, by attributing to other people malevolence and malice and envy and stupidity. The narcissist's helplessness is not the narcissist's fault. Other people are evil. The narcissist is helpless because he refuses to be evil. His helplessness is the helplessness of the morally righteous and upright victim. And by doing so, the narcissist regains or restores or buttresses his grandiosity. How to regain a sense of mastery, an internal locus of control? When one feels helpless all the time, the victim of circumstances and people and environments and institutions. How, in this narrative, can one at the same time claim to be godlike, masterful, in control? Contempt is the answer. Contempt is the narcissist's projected shame. What is the underlying sentence, the underlying narrative of contempt? They ought to be ashamed of themselves. They are contemptible. They are inferior.
Reject shame, choose victimhood, blame and demonize others, and spend your life suffering the constant onslaughts of the dumb, malicious, untrustworthy, the inferior. So this is the path to contempt for the vulnerable narcissist. Now let's dig into how this contempt shows itself, and that would be through the narcissist's duplicitous, underhanded, passive-aggressive speech, which subtly reveals their contempt and envy.
Passive-aggressive is defined in the dictionary of the American Psychological Association as characteristic of behavior that is seemingly innocuous, accidental, or neutral, but that indirectly displays an unconscious aggressive motive. The passive-aggressive speech is underhanded. For example, a backhanded compliment is a subversive, passive-aggressive speech. The behavior patterns of the covert narcissist are intended to subvert, to undermine, and all the time without accepting responsibility, pretending not to know what you're doing. The totality of the covert narcissist speech, with not a single exception, is goal-oriented, agenda-driven, and the agenda is negative affects, envy, hatred, resentment, the wish to punish other people, undermine them, take them down, destroy them, the Machiavellian need to manipulate.
There are many ways to be underhanded and passive-aggressive, so this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but I've picked out 4 which I think best represent what vulnerable narcissists tend to do. And the first one is condescending behavior. This would be subtle jabs, patronizing, talking down to others, devaluing others' accomplishments, all while faking ignorance and innocence and waiting for you to take the bait and get upset. And then the whole conversation will be about your reaction. And you will be gaslit into oblivion, and others will probably hear about it because, being subversive, they love a good smear campaign, and they will triangulate. They will get others on their side, or they'll just say other people agree with them. They fight dirty, enabled by contempt, envy, victimhood, and their self-idealization.
They'll say things like, oh, must be nice to have a family that just always bails you out. Must be nice to get overpaid for your job. And they might even say things like, oh, well, if I had been supported like you, not only would I have won that award, my goodness, I would have excelled at everything. Or, of course, you're doing well in school. It's because you aren't growing up in the absolutely awful way I had to grow up. I would have gone on to do great things if it hadn't been for how awful my childhood was. And in that way, anything that you achieved as a child gets invalidated and besmirched because they turn it into one more polemic about their victimhood and their suffering.
They'll start saying, ugh, college is so stupid, and people who go to college are stupid, or going to work every day, ugh, God, you're so stupid. Mortgages are stupid. Owning things is stupid. You start to recognize over time that they often just appears that they think everything's stupid because they really just couldn't get it together. And all of what you read as humility was actually just this disdain for a world that they are too entitled, that they feel that they need to participate in, or that they can't get it together to actually be able to participate in it.
They can't help themselves with this. They start yawning, and these are also people who will use eye rolling.
He creates secret coalitions against you, smear campaigns, hiding cowardly, cravenly behind others.
Next, we have deflecting, redirecting the attention away from them and what they did. They'll shift the blame to someone else, change the subject, and derail the whole conversation. They've done something wrong, they're caught, they'll find a way to make it someone else's fault. Probably your fault, because if you're the one declaring there's an issue, their contempt for you at that point is all but guaranteed. They'll question your motive. Maybe you can't be trusted. Maybe you have it out for them. What about that thing you did that one time? Isn't that worse? You're not perfect. As they pivot again and again, their disingenuous, duplicitous, obstinate, contemptuous nature will shine through.
This is a good way for the narcissist to put the focus back on the person who's brought that evidence to them. It's to deflect it and to attack the attacker, the person who is attacking them. This tactic is also known as whataboutism. In this way, it doesn't really matter what they do or what you've caught them doing. They can either always bring up something else that you've done, or they can simply make it up. And in your indignation at being accused of something that you didn't do, you might have an explosive response, and then the argument and the conversation gets focused on your explosive response rather than what they did.
And then there's one of the worst, most frustrating tactics of all, gaslighting, where you're meant to believe something completely contradictory to what you know to be true. In an act of defiance, they force you to question your reality, your memories, your perception. They will repeatedly deny, and then they'll pretend. They take on the stubbornness of a mule and the intellect of an insect. I've witnessed a human become nearly indestructible simply by becoming dumber. Uninhibited by integrity, they gain the ability to spread their wings, spit in your face, and fly directly into the sun. Yet somehow, like the phoenix, they can arise to do it again.
There is a cruelty that narcissists bring when they go into anger. They want to make sure that you hurt, and they want to create as much pain and discomfort as they possibly can, because in their scoreboarding mindset, it's like, you're going to see that I'm the one that has the upper hand here, and you better not ever dare go against me.
So they will simply deny whatever you bring to them, whatever you say that they've done, whatever you accuse them of. They'll say that didn't happen. If it did happen, I didn't mean it. I didn't say that. Well, we have you on tape saying it. Okay, well, if I did say it, you've heard me wrong. No, we didn't hear you wrong. It's there on the tape. Okay, well, if I did say it and you didn't hear me wrong, that's not what I meant. And the denial will just go multiple logical levels deep until you're driven into complete exasperation. Thrown into that will be a distraction. So as I'm denying whatever it is that you're accusing me of doing, I'm going to distract you. I'm going to make you look at something over there. I'm going to make this situation about something else or someone else. Another good way for me to distract you would be to use a pre-existing trigger that I know you have, a particularly sensitive subject or issue that I know you have, and raise that. You're pretending not to understand.
The covert narcissist is going to pretend that he is stupid, that he is helpless, that he is ignorant.
What this sounds like is often, I don't understand. What do you mean? What is it again? When was this? Are these my feet? What was the question again? And this can drive the victim insane as they try to explain themselves over and over again, even in the most plain, simple language. But the next thing you know, the narcissist, again, playing that victim card, the narcissist is now the one who's being abused because they're being shouted at, they're being swore at, or whatever.
It's their way of letting me know, don't mess with me. You're not going to get anywhere when you try to confront me.
The narcissist and the psychopath denies that anything at all had happened. Then he parades a kaleidoscopic array of protean contradictory versions of what may actually have happened or occurred. Then he minimizes the meaning of what finally he grudgingly acknowledges had transpired. Throughout this teeth-extracting process, the narcissist implies that to dispute his claims or to doubt him is a sure sign of mental derangement and proof positive of an impaired reality testing, or else it's malicious.
A fourth, somewhat theatrical domination tactic that narcissists justify through contempt is emotional extortion or emotional blackmail, weaponizing their fragility. Aggressive victimhood, something like threatening self-harm in an attempt to regain control over someone who is confronting them with an issue or threatening to leave them. I've seen a narcissist so frustrated and desperate to wriggle out of accountability that when she had no other excuse and couldn't justifiably claim to be a victim, she quickly escalated the conversation to an argument, ran inside and grabbed a knife, carved up her arm, and then showed it to the other person and said, "Look what you made me do," which obviously left the other person visibly shaken up, disoriented, and in tears. It's a psychological warfare where the narcissist attempts to manipulate through emotion, to weaponize empathy, shooting for the Achilles heel of lesser beings who would dare to challenge them.
The covert narcissist fakes helplessness, neediness. I can't do it without you. I need you. If you're gone, if you leave me, I will die. And so on. This is a form of emotional extortion, and is known as control from the bottom.
It's look at the pain you're causing me by doing that. It triggers all manners of distress with them. And the common excuse that's often accompanied by this are things like, it's not my fault, it's my anxiety. It's like the victim is responsible for easing their anxiety. You're so hurtful. Now, this is a way of guilting someone for pointing out that toxic behavior. It's also a form of gaslighting, having someone doubt their own experience over how they've been treated, leading them to believe that they're at fault for feeling hurt.
It's important to understand that the narcissist cries intentionally. He's sending out a signal. I'm a victim. I am moral. I'm righteous. I haven't done anything wrong, and look what he or she is doing to me. Like every single aspect and dimension of his endless choreography, the narcissist crying is instrumental. It is intended to convey a message, to signal, especially a virtue signal, to establish a position of victimhood, to manipulate his environment, to influence your behaviors, to shame you, to guilt trip you, to emotionally blackmail you, and to trigger in you empathy and maternal instincts. It has to do with rage. The narcissist's tears do not reflect an underlying depressive position. They're not associated with sadness. And he is furious because he experiences self-pity. It's as if the narcissist is telling himself, I'm being victimized here. I should pity myself. But pitying myself is shameful because it means I'm not godlike. I'm not omnipotent. So I'm experiencing shame. This shame is life-threatening.
Then there is resentment. This one ties in with victimhood and is usually evidenced by a person or group serving as a long-term, occasional punching bag, and the primary reason for the narcissist's pitiful state or lack of progress. A vulnerable narcissist might hold on to the same old story about the same perpetrator, regardless of perhaps numerous attempts at reconciliation. And there are a few obvious reasons for this. Life usually only provides so many believable situations in which the vulnerable narcissist might be considered a helpless victim, and older stories are harder to prove or disprove, and there will likely be fewer witnesses still around to counter their narrative. So maintaining an older trauma is usually easier than establishing a new one. Also, as you get older, you honestly have less of an excuse not to grow past your old troubles or relationships. So real or perceived traumas from childhood are often the ones most aggressively maintained, often with a level of passion that would make you think it happened yesterday. If the person trying to reconcile is you, what you might have thought was a successful apology ends up needing to be repeated again and again. In the absence of a new villain, their need to be a victim outweighs the utility of the relationship that you are trying to piece back together. Anything that gets you back on your knees is fine with them because they are now back in a position of power.
In the case of the narcissist, the grudge fulfills numerous other functions, which explains why the narcissist finds it extremely difficult to not hold grudges. So the first function of a grudge is to reconstitute grandiosity. So any infringement, any impingement, any breach, any challenge that somehow dares to hint that the narcissist's grandiosity is misconstrued or perhaps fantastic or perhaps counterfactual. This results in narcissistic injury And the narcissist then desperately needs to reconstitute his or her grandiosity.
This is part of that hidden superiority. They want to hold themselves over you, and so they'll hold a grudge, and it's very difficult to have good conflict resolution skills with them.
Maybe the vulnerable narcissist was legitimately a victim, but it happened like 10, 20, 30 years ago, the victimization, and they bring it up kind of as if it's a current issue.
The grudge is infinite. It never goes away. The narcissist never forgives. He keeps revisiting. Underneath it all, there's the hidden assumption that harm and damage and transgressions are irreversible. Like you cannot undo the transgression. As far as the narcissist is concerned, there's zero tolerance. One strike and you're out. And the narcissist has an obligation, an ethical obligation, to restore the moral balance. The narcissist wishes to see the transgressor, wishes to witness the transgressor humiliated, because the narcissist is not interested in restitution. Narcissist is interested in retribution. But still, it's great fun to witness your enemy kowtowing, begging, supplicating, crying, and so on.
Next is manipulative and exploitative behavior. Like any form of narcissism, there is a constant pursuit of narcissistic supply, which when combined with a deep-seated envy, a sense of superiority, a lack of empathy, results in regular manipulative and exploitative behavior. This willingness to manipulate comes with a few beliefs. First, that they are great actors. And second, that you are a fool, a dupe, someone to be taken advantage of. Or for the vulnerable narcissist, someone who perhaps should have known better than to attack an innocent victim, a victim with claws. Or perhaps they perceive the world as fundamentally unfair, so they can bend a few rules to get ahead. After all, they are the protagonist, the wounded hero, if you will. But in reality, they are not always such great actors, especially to any perceptive person who has spent a good deal of time around them. They can get sometimes a bit sloppy when they get desperate. They can overact, where their words and actions get a bit too irrational, and you're left wondering if you're honestly meant to believe what you are being shown. When you fall prey to their manipulations, should you ever realize what's happening and attempt to correct course to protect yourself, you will doubtless join the ranks of everyone else in their life who has apparently abandoned or betrayed them. They will likely use you to form a new narrative to gain the sympathy of whoever is next. Somewhat like the life cycle of a virus or parasite, which usually ends poorly for the host cell or organism.
With the vulnerable folks, they get their supply through this passive-aggressive manipulation.
Solicitation. This is a speech that is intended to trigger, elicit, and provoke highly specific reactions in the recipients of the speech. Pseudo-humility is intended to trigger its own contradiction and negation. It is a way of eliciting narcissistic supply, however indirectly and manipulatively. So the covert narcissist would make claims that appear on the surface to be self-deprecating, self-negating, modest, humble, would eat humble pie ostentatiously, and yet all the time, throughout the speech act, the covert narcissist fully expects you to disagree with him. The covert narcissist is going to pretend that he is stupid, that he is helpless, that he is ignorant, nescient, in need of enlightenment and education and elucidation, and triggering you, the listener, triggering you to assume the mantle of a guru or a teacher or a patron, and thereby assume responsibility for the covert narcissist's mistakes and defeats. And you're supposed to say, it's okay, everyone is like that, you've done nothing wrong, and so on, thereby assuming the ownership of the mistake and the failure.
So you might end up falling down the reassuring rabbit hole of course, I like you. I love you. Oh my gosh, no, you're great. And you may even go even further and either apologize Or put yourself down and say things like, oh, I'm so sorry I don't show it more. It's me. It's me. I have an avoidant attachment. I don't always show my appreciation. So a couple of things then happen. The vulnerable narcissist is rewarded for their manipulative, victimized banter and saying stuff like, you really don't like me. It also plays on your empathy, and whether for trauma-bonded reasons or you just being nice, you will let them know, no, it's me, it's not you. Yes, it is. And then you'll say, I'm sorry, which will end up leaving you feel ashamed and frustrated and angry. And they have now been rewarded for this behavior. And guess what? Because they've been rewarded, they're going to do it again.
Or the covert narcissist may act helpless, needy, and thereby trigger in you protective instincts or a savior, healer, fixer, rescuer complex. The manipulation is about modifying your behaviors so as to render you self-defeating and self-destructive and self-trashing and self-molesting and self-mutilating.
Ultimately, you are telling them that they're great or wonderful or reassuring them that you want to be there with them. This whole thing pushes you into a deeply inauthentic space of saying things that are frankly patently untrue for you.
Now, so far we've mostly discussed manipulative speech, sort of what you might expect to experience during a conversation with a vulnerable narcissist. But now I want to get a bit more specific and combine manipulation with inauthenticity, a false persona. Now, I'm not referring to the incongruence within them, the gap between their idealized and realized self, the struggle to uphold their false self. The false self is more of a reactionary, delusional self-perception, whereas what I'm referring to here is a willingness to be deliberately and strategically fake, duplicitous, a manipulation, the difference you might notice between how these individuals act in public versus in private. Everything from fake charm, virtue, and humility to fake anger and struggle and tears, anything to get them what they want and protect what they have. So manipulation part 2, they are just fake. Yesterday they were screaming at you, but today they're posting a video about the importance of love and patience. A month ago it was love bombing, and today it's narcissistic rage. And not simply because they're at war with themselves, because of their false self, but because narcissism is closely correlated with psychopathy, and to them, being fake may seem the most direct and justifiable path to whatever it is they want or feel entitled to. And as part of this manipulation, you may find that they repeatedly spin up promises of reform to their characteristically passive, victimized lifestyles, their antisocial, manipulative, or self-destructive tendencies, whatever they've been confronted on. But time after time, the narcissist is not going to change. Their grandiosity simply will not allow it, for the issue has never been them. It's always been everyone else. This could look like an adult moving back in with their parents for support while they attend college classes. But then there always seems to be a reason that they didn't sign up. They just need or want something from you, and for a time they will at least pretend to meet you halfway. But know that the mere suggestion that change on their part is necessary is likely to result in contempt, which you will likely be faced with when you confront them about their lack of follow-through.
So they may be really nice to everyone else, especially with the covert narcissist, where appearances really matter a lot more to them.
What they'll say in public about themselves is very contradictory to who they really are.
Behind this fake, likable, kind person who sometimes acts as if he's a codependent, or she is a narcissist who's selfish, often mean, and is only about their own needs.
They're responsible for everything that has ever happened to them. Never mind the lies they're telling you. They've never been on the receiving end. They made it happen. But they get away with it most of the time, until the final curtain. And they get away with it because of superficial charm, which is a main characteristic of psychopathy, by the way. They're charming. They're nice. They're kind, they're smiling, they're compassionate, they're understanding, and it's all fake. Totally fake. And they're persistent with this act. They have thespian skills. They play the wounded healer and the wounded child. They cater to your maternal instincts, even if you're a male.
And if this is somebody that you're really in a close relationship with, if this is a partner of yours or a parent or a sibling, it is very difficult because it's a very isolating place to be. Other people don't see it. Other people will downplay what's happening.
They're more likely to focus on the negative mood symptoms. You know, they'll assume like, no, it's not narcissism. They're just depressed, and they show their depression by being irritable. No, they just have really low self-esteem.
The covert narcissist fakes empathy, might appear to have enormous empathy. The covert narcissist might say to you like, oh, I cry at movies all the time, when they actually don't. But they are very skilled at pretending to have empathy. So narcissists in general do not have full empathy. They might have cognitive empathy. They might have the ability to understand their thinking, understands why people feel what they feel. And then they use that knowledge to manipulate the person. But it's not full empathy. It's not like understanding cognitively and then physically feeling for the other person and then affectively feeling, right? Caring.
If their mouths are moving, they're lying. Their lies may be goal-oriented, to secure money, to secure sex, to secure narcissistic supply, or the presence of the intimate partner.
I saved this one to the end because I think it's kind of important in how it differentiates grandiose narcissism from vulnerable. And this is repeated grand efforts to change, failed attempts at reform. That's what we see with vulnerable narcissism.
You won't notice that this person really isn't trying to improve themselves. If anything, their life is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And no matter how often you offer them some advice, they poo-poo it. They say to you, you don't know how hard it is. You can say that because you're blah, 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 blah. But I'm me. And this is what's happened to me. And this is why I can't do what you did. When you're dealing with a covert narcissist, forget it. They could have the world at their feet. They could have access to tremendous resources, but they won't take them. They won't put these resources into action. Instead, they rely on you to feel sorry for them. They want you to mirror back this idea that, of course, your life is so difficult. Of course, you're so misunderstood. And this is why you get to sit back and be irresponsible. This is why your anger towards other people is justified. This is why your rage towards that woman is valid.
One last thing I want to point out when it comes to the vulnerable narcissist's tendency towards performative, manipulative, duplicitous behavior is that there are certain social environments where vulnerable narcissists can really thrive in their fakeness, gaining access to unlimited narcissistic supply. And that would be wherever you find groups of people who are kind, gracious, empathetic, humble, and forgiving. Those choosing faith over skepticism, willing to regularly extend to others the grace and forgiveness that they feel they have received. I am, of course, referring to religious groups, specifically Christian religious groups, since these tenets are so central to their beliefs. And so here's a few more clips specific to that circumstance.
A religious narcissist pursues narcissistic supply by presenting as a pious, godly person in order to get admiration and honor. So if you notice someone that has an inordinate need to showcase their godliness, how much they pray and fast, how much they're giving to other people or charities, how much ministry they're doing, how much they're serving, how much God is speaking to them, that could be a red flag that they are creating an image, this kind of image, for the honor, praise, and admiration of others.
Holy in public, hurtful in private. She doesn't chase holiness. She curates it. She knows how to perform. Hands lifted high in worship, prayers that sound like sermons, kindness on display, so long as people are watching. But behind closed doors, her tone sharpens, she withholds affection, gives the cold shoulder, and flips into silent punishment if you don't play along. She's highly image conscious. She's not chasing Christ-likeness, she's chasing admiration. She may lead, serve, give, and fast, but it's not to honor God, it's to build her brand. And what seems like humility is actually a carefully managed image. What seems like righteousness is spiritual manipulation in disguise.
They may also be looking for fans and followers and have no interest to cultivate relationships or have people close enough to them to speak truthfully into their lives. They will expect that you are required by God to forgive them, but they will give no thought to their need to repent. If you cross them, if you slight them in any way, there will be hell to pay.
She plays the wounded one to avoid accountability and maintain power. And the more unsure you are, the more in control she becomes. So ask yourself this: do I feel free to speak with her? Or am I constantly walking on eggshells? Does she take ownership when she's wrong? Or always end up the one needing comfort? Is her public faith consistent with her private fruit? Or does something shift based upon who's watching?
Their core insecurity, as always, means that they're attempting to bolster their fragile interior to feel safer or look better. And by looking good to the world and doing nice things, it allows them to get that desperately needed validation. These are also the people who ensure that their charitable moments are very well documented. They definitely make sure that there are videos and photos which promptly appear on social media.
And in Christian circles, this false humility really flies under the radar and sadly fools many in leadership. But behind the meek tone is manipulation, not ministry.
And with that, I'll bring this to a close, and I just want to end by stating again that I am not a mental health professional and I'm not speaking authoritatively on the subject. This certainly hasn't been an exhaustive description of vulnerable narcissism, and I'm quite certain I left out some details that might not have been as relevant to my own experience. This was a personal project, and its purpose is simply to organize some topics and expedite anyone's learning journey to get someone from knowing nothing to knowing something. I wish you all the best. Good luck out there.